Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben.
This is Diego Sanchez, Randy Couture,
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio. Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
From New York to Melbourne, Australia, welcome back to Submission Radio, episode 198. It's Wednesday, the 20th of November. Cass, I'd like to say we're fresh from New York, but it's been a couple of weeks since we've come back from that historic event at Madison Square Garden. Man, it is good. It is good to be back with another episode of Submission Radio.
Yeah, man, fresh from New York. We're almost crusty from New York. We're almost stale. We've been sitting around like an old piece of bread on the kitchen counter, just collecting a bit of dust, a bit of mold growing on the sides. So we have to shake it all off, freshen things up, make a big splash, make a big return, and come back to doing the show, doing the program. And man, you hit it on the nail on the head. It is good to be back. It is good to be back, good to be chatting to you guys, and good to be bringing sexy guests back into your ears and back into your lives. We've got, man, the guests are sexy this week. They always are, but especially this week, we've got the one and only Luke Rockhold. We have been hounding this man for an interview for weeks and months and potentially even years, and this week he's finally kind enough to join us on the program. I'm very excited. Obviously, no one's heard from the man since UFC 239. There's been rumors, or he said to Ariel at one point that he's maybe considering retirement. A little bit cryptic, not a whole lot, so we hope to get more out of him in this tell-all, reveal-all interview and talk about his future. So obviously got a grappling match coming up at Polaris 12 as well. So I'm dying to hear what's been going in the man's life and what exactly is his fighting future. Also, Maycee Barber is taking on Roxanne Modafferi. Already her next fight lined up. That's going to be January 18th, which is the card that a lot of people believe Conor McGregor will return on. So the future fighting on the same card as Conor McGregor, continuing her journey through the women's flyweight division and to beat that clock that she has to become the youngest UFC champion. So there's a lot to speak to Maycee Barber about. Brett Okamoto returning to the program. There's a few things to talk about this week as far as MMA discussion goes. Kind of a quiet week, but we did have Jan Blachowicz taking Jacare in the close split decision this past weekend. Also had Ben Askren retiring in a somewhat not really shocking announcement on the Helwani show. Also, Nick Diaz had an interesting interview, to say the least, not that long ago. So there's a bunch of things to talk about with Brett Okamoto. And then Dan Hooker. What better time to get Dan Hooker on? New Zealand is on the rise. City Kickboxing is in full swing. It seems like everybody there is either a champion or fighting for the title or has big pivotal fights coming up in their near future. And UFC New Zealand, UFC Auckland has been announced next year in February. So we wanted to get Dan Hooker on the program to talk about that and pick his brain about who he might potentially like to fight. You got to think he's going to be main eventing, right? So it's a sexy show, man. You did a great job this week, Dennis, with the guests, and dude, I'm excited.
Yeah, man. It's great to be back. And just quickly, a big thank you to Musashi for getting us over to New York for UFC 244. A big thank you to Ross and the team. They do an amazing job. We've had a lot of listeners hit us up with Musashi-related questions. Send us Musashi-related photos. We love it. Keep them coming. Of course, Musashi, one of the best companies out here in Australia, helping out, local combat companies like ourselves make it happen. So a big thank you to them. And Cass, just for everybody for next week, there will be no episode of Submission Radio. We're just putting it out there right now. You'll be traveling. You'll be away. We won't be able to do a show then, but people don't need to fear. We will be back with another episode the following week.
Yeah, and also, the last time you guys saw us, we were drinking from Jorge Masvidal's cup back in New York, and a lot of people were saying, hey, enjoy the potential sicknesses that you guys are going to get from spreading all the germs and drinking from other people's cups. It's been 2 weeks, and the doctors say we are all clear, so just wanted to clear that up for everybody wondering. No, lethal diseases since then.
Yeah, we're clear. We promise. No USADA testing necessary. Just quickly, Kaz, before we kick this off, on a personal note, there's a young man from the gym that I train at, Malvern Health and Fitness. He had an intra-club fight. He won. His name's Adam. He's a massive fan of the program, listens every week. Throwing it out there, Adam, congratulations. Me and Casper are proud of you, my man.
Yeah, man.
Representing the Submission Radio name on the big stage and getting the big W. Big things coming for Adam. And just quickly as well, for everybody out there who's new to Submission Radio, leave us your reviews on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, and of course, down in the comment section below, share your thoughts. We love to read your comments. A lot of OGs in the comment section, Cass, sort of sharing their thoughts. We can't wait to see what happens after the episode drops today. Of course, me and Cass read them, react to them, respond to them ourselves. That's also for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All those channels are open for you guys to contact us and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of the biggest things that I look forward to when we have these pretty frequent returns is the comments in the comment section, everybody chatting amongst themselves and talking to us. And then I look forward to taking almost an evening off, clearing everything and just responding to as many comments as possible, if not all of them. So we really personally look forward to that. But without further ado, I mean, like you mentioned, Dennis, all our social media, you can follow us there, you can DM us, you can chat to us there as well. There's plenty of platforms. If someone was trying to track us down and get in contact with us, I mean, we just could not have made it easier. Like, it would be impossible for us to hide anywhere, and the debt collectors seem to know these things as well. So, yeah, chat to us anytime you guys like. Without further ado, it's a pretty sexy show. We got Brett Okamoto kicking things off, discussing the week in MMA. Then we got Dan Hooker afterwards discussing UFC Auckland. Then we got Maycee Barber afterwards previewing her fight. And of course, talking about this Paige VanZant fight and why that didn't happen, because that's kind of what we were all expecting. She made the call, right? And then rounding off the show, we've got Luke Rockhold with this reveal all, tell all interview. So I'm very excited. It's time to get the show on the road. No more dilly-dallying, because our first guest is on the line. I believe he's in an airport about to catch a plane, and he's carved out just a little bit of time for us to chat to us. So how nice is this guy? He's on the line. Don't want to keep him waiting. And Dennis, I believe you're about to introduce him.
Our next guest finishes up another amazing year of MMA coverage and content for ESPN, breaking news, fights, and hearts all over the MMA community. You know him from ESPN. We know him from our dreams. Magic Brett Okamoto, welcome back to Submission Radio. I think it's no surprise to anyone when we say it's great to have you back on the program.
The best intro you guys have given me yet. They just keep getting better and better. You top them every time.
You know, it doesn't come easy, Brett, but we try. And yes, I know what you're wondering, and the answer is yes. Magic Brett Okamoto is a hat tip to Magic Mike, of course, but you already knew that. Welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you. One of the rare off weeks in MMA, but obviously it's been a while, so we have a bunch of stuff to cover with you, man. First of all is, of course, the somewhat shocking news that Ben Askren retired from MMA. Maybe not the craziest thing, you know, given his age and how his career's gone recently, but still kind of caught us off guard, right? What did you make of his retirement?
Honestly, it didn't catch me off guard at all. I you know, if you remember, Ben has been pretty open about this, but I feel like it's not like this really kind of sexy headline, so I don't know how much attention it got, but he had always said that he was just one of those guys. And you know how Ben is. I mean, he's got a very cerebral approach to the game. He said, once you're past like your late 20s, you're not in your prime anymore, you know? And I remember like vividly having a conversation with him about how when he was a kid, you know, he would look at guys like Barry Sanders and be like, these guys retired at the right age, you know? You should stay in athletics until you hit your peak, and then you shouldn't stick around too much longer after that. And so I knew him coming back into the UFC was, you know, it was him coming out of retirement only for the purpose of, this is an opportunity to fight in the UFC. I can't pass it up. You know, as far as just being an athlete, he had already thought that he was kind of, you know, done. And he's not the kind of guy that I think, there are some guys who are like, man, this guy's going to have a real hard time walking away from the sport. This guy's going to have a really hard time in retirement, finding other things. Like Ben Askren is the furthest thing from that. He's got a lot of different things that he can do. He's got a lot of different things that he cares about. So when I saw him lose to Damian Maia, I thought that there was, I wasn't sure. I wasn't like, oh yeah, Ben's definitely retiring, but I thought it was definitely a strong possibility.
I think the interesting thing with Ben, there's a lot of interesting things about you, Brett. With Ben is, of course, yeah, this hip thing. He's mentioned how he's got to go back and get a hip replacement. I know that you're the man on the inside for a lot of these things. How much do you think this hip and sort of the deteriorating body that he's had to deal with after a long career, you think had an effect on some of these sort of, you know, performances that he's had in the UFC?
I mean, look, you get a hip replacement, and that's pretty serious. You know, I mean, that's not like you got a fractured bone, you know, that you just need to give 4 to 6 weeks to heal. Like a hip replacement is a pretty serious deal. Yeah, I mean, Ben has obviously put a lot of wear and tear on his body through not just MMA, but also wrestling. And, you know, one thing about Ben is I don't think, and this is kind of crazy to say, And I don't want it to be taken out of context, but as far as just the most athletic guy you've ever seen compete in the sport, he was never really that guy. He was never going to wow you with like his speed, or his explosiveness. I mean, he was a guy who relied on getting a hold of you and using that strength that he's got, the grip strength, and then the technique, and wrestling you down. And so, I mean, to have a hip that requires now a replacement, I mean, of course, I think that I'm not stepping out on a limb saying that it was a hindrance of his. But I mean, at the same time, I don't think we can just give him a pass and say that, had he not had this hip issue, his time at the UFC would have been drastically different. I mean, I think all these guys are dealing with something, and to try to quantify it and say exactly what impact it had on his performances is a tough thing to do, and I'm not going to take anything away, obviously, from the win of George Masvidal. I think if Ben's hip was fine, I don't know if that would have prevented him from getting knocked out in that fight. And then yeah, the Damian Maia fight. I mean, look, Damian Maia is an older guy himself. He's what, 40 years old, and yeah, I think Ben made maybe some tactical mistakes in that fight that cost him more so than perhaps a hip injury.
I mean, the big discussion is, he did Bellator, he did one, and then he ended up at UFC, probably sort of like you mentioned, like physically not at his peak, but during his time in the UFC, he did a lot from the perspective of building up Masvidal to being one of the most exciting guys in the division, who actually drew, big pay-per-view points and big attention to that division. What do you look at Askren's legacy in MMA as now that he retires, and this sort of brief but substantial UFC run from the perspective of him being able to gain fans' attention all over the world in such a very short period?
I think when you look at it competitively speaking, Ben's time in the UFC was a failure. I mean, I think that's fair to say, and I think that he would probably, Ben's a straight shooter. I think he'd probably agree with that. I mean, he came into the UFC hoping to win a championship, and he got that win over Robbie Lawler that some people look at as still highly controversial, if not quote unquote wrong, but that he was fortunate on some of the things that happened in that fight. And then he got knocked out in 5 seconds, and then he lost to a guy, Damian Maia, who was barely ranked in the top 10. I mean, that is not a success. You can't say that was a success at all. But what Ben did was he came in and he showed maybe the UFC that they missed out, that they screwed up by not signing him a long time ago, like when he tried to get signed with them before he went to one. I think the amount of attention that he got, and his ability to stay in the headlines, and just how media friendly he was, and how good he was every time. I mean, it's one thing to be media friendly and give a lot of interviews. It's another thing to be really interesting and gain a whole lot of eyeballs in every single one of them, And so I think from that standpoint, Ben kind of proved his point that, hey, he should have been around. He should have been here. And it's kind of like a shame that he wasn't here during the prime of his career. But when you talk about competitively speaking, it's a failure. It's a failure what he came in and did in the UFC.
Just quickly, just on that, I mean, we've seen people retiring MMA. Of course, he's got this hip thing that he's got to deal with. So a lot of people sort of come back in MMA after these retirements. But do you think we'll see Ben Askren maybe make a comeback if this whole hip replacement goes to plan and the UFC sort of offers him some of that big money for a comeback?
I don't think so. I mean, you never say never. And like you mentioned there at the very end, money can make people change their minds. But Ben seems very much like a guy who, had this opportunity never came along, he wouldn't have gone back to one, where he was making fine money, what he categorized as good money. He wouldn't have come back if it wasn't for the UFC. And now he's had that. He can go to bed at night knowing that he got his chance in the UFC, and I don't anticipate him ever fighting again.
Just one more follow-up on that, Brett, and it's sort of what you were talking about, how, competitively his UFC run was a failure. Do you think in hindsight, it was a mistake to go to the UFC? Like, I know that we would have never known these things had he not actually gone, but I feel like for his legacy, if he never went to the UFC, there would always be this aura about him that, like, well, he probably could have done and really well, and he probably could have won a belt. But now it's almost like we definitively know that, well, he wasn't able to do that. But then on the flip side, he rose his brand so much in his time in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer to that is in the eye of the beholder, or you'd have to ask Ben. I mean, on one hand, if you really care about your legacy and you like the idea of people having that, sense of mystery of how would he have done in the UFC, we'll never know. I mean, if you're that type of person, and then that's important to you, then it would be a mistake. But I don't think Ben is like that. I think it would have impacted Ben's life more had he gone to bed every night and not known what would have happened if he and never would have gotten that chance. I remember one thing he told me is that when he went to the Olympics and he lost, it was like one of the most heartbreaking experiences of his life, but at least he got the opportunity to go to the Olympics and find out, but he didn't, up until, this year, he didn't get that opportunity in the UFC. So he never really got to know. And so I think that would have driven him a lot crazier. And I think he made some money fighting 3 times for the UFC. And I think he had some fun. Yeah, I think he really enjoyed himself this year, despite the results. So I tend to think that Ben probably doesn't have any regrets about going to the UFC. No.
And maybe setting himself up for potentially a broadcasting run, a little bit like a Chael Sonnen, and a lot of people love to hear that guy speak, so we'll see what happens there. But Speaking of older fighters, Jacare moved up to light heavyweight this past weekend, but was beaten by Jan. Do you agree with the decision, Brett, that was sort of went on in that fight? And also, what do you make of all these middleweights trying to move up to light heavyweight, but not really being able to find success?
I had the fight for Jacare, but I thought that, you could have, there were some of those rounds that were very, very close. I mean, as everybody who watched the fight knows, there were some rounds that were very inactive. So, and sometimes when there's not a lot of offense scored, it's hard it's hard to judge those rounds. So I had Jacare winning the first 3, but I mean, I wasn't up in arms, thinking that he got robbed or anything. And as far as guys moving up, I mean, I think it's, we saw Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos move up and have success. And then we saw Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold and Jacare move up and not have success. And I think there are some differences in those guys. I would argue that Anthony and Thiago are probably more in their primes than the other 3. The other 3 have also, kind of been on a little bit of skids. And so that incorporates injuries, that incorporates mindset, it incorporates a whole lot of things. I mean, sometimes, as guys will tell you, have told me, it's hard to snap a losing streak sometimes. It's just like, it has a snowball effect occasionally. So it's interesting how, the story of last year was guys moving up from middleweight and then having a lot of success and getting title shots at light heavyweight. And now it's been the complete opposite in this one. I mean, I think, especially when you look at the case of Jacare and Chris, man, they couldn't get their opponent to the ground, and when you have guys who, they don't have to rely on their wrestling to win a fight, but it's certainly a tool in their box. And if they can't get these bigger guys down or hold them down and keep them down, then you're really kind of handcuffing them and you're removing a part of their game. So you never know, like sometimes guys will move up and they'll enjoy a lot of benefits. Like they're not cutting as much weight. They feel better. It takes a harder shot to knock them out. It seems like they're more durable and they just feel better. They have a better energy about them. And then other times though, you are going up and fighting bigger guys, and I think that's what happened in the Jacare fight and the Chris Weidman fight, especially, is you could just tell that these guys couldn't implement the game plans that they wanted to.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating how guys like Thiago and guys like Anthony Smith were kind of written off, especially by some of their former middleweight competitors, guys like Luke Rockhold, as if they can have success, I can have success as well. And now we see that these guys who are a little bit older didn't have the success, and it kind of lends more credibility to Thiago and Anthony Smith. And I always think back to Anthony Smith saying, hey, it's not that fucking easy, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. And of course the points that you mentioned about them being a little bit out of their prime. But neither Jan, despite his win streak, isn't going to be fighting Jon Jones. It looks like we're hearing reports that it might be Dominic Reyes versus Jon Jones at UFC 247 in Houston, Texas on February 8th. I'm not expecting you to, confirm here and give us the scoop, but I'm just wondering, from what you're hearing behind the scenes, does that seem like a likely sort of timetable? And is that likely the fight that we're going to get for Jon Jones next?
I think so, man. I mean, I thought I had been hearing before the fight in Boston that the winner of Dominic versus Chris would most likely get the next fight against Jon. And then when you look at what happened in that fight, Dominic certainly didn't do anything to, not earn it. I mean, if that was already sort of the plan going in, and I think it was a little bit stronger with Chris, just because Chris is a name, and if you're the UFC, if Chris gets the win, then that's immediately that's a marketable fight. The Dominic Reyes fight, a little less so, but if that was already sort of the game plan going into Boston, and then Dominic scores a first round knockout, now you got Jon on Twitter, which Jon messes around on Twitter all the time, so I don't take really anything that he says on Twitter seriously. But you do have him on there saying that he's met with his coaches and that Dominic's the guy. I mean, I think that's the fight. I think that's the obvious fight. That's the one I'm expecting, yeah.
Why do you think it's taken so long for this fight to sort of come together and be announced? Because like you mentioned, this was the plan for a while now. And I know Jon Jones, he likes to troll the world, but it almost seemed like he was waiting for something else. It almost seemed like he was exploring his options and kind of wanted something else. And it's almost like, he's kind of settling for Dominic Reyes, at least in his mind.
And just to add to that question, sorry, Brett, was there any chance that this man has been injured behind the scenes, or something else has been going on as to why the delay has been happening?
I haven't heard anything about an injury. I know that, this idea of Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight has been around for years, right? And now at heavyweight, there's a little bit of some, it's up in the air, right? Because Stipe Miocic has the injury to his eye. Not sure when he's going to come back. Cormier has said he's only going to fight one fight and one fight only, and that's Stipe, or else he's retiring. I think, both UFC and Jon potentially were kind of keeping their options open in terms of, hey, if Stipe is not fighting for a long time, or if Daniel, is going to step in, or if he's going to retire, maybe we'll figure that out first, because if there's an opening there and we need Jon to go up and fight at heavyweight, that's a bigger fight than him fighting Dominic Reyes, right? And then along with that comes negotiations, and Jon wants to get paid more if he's moving up to heavyweight, which is understandable. So I think that there's just some things to clear up in the heavyweight division that could potentially impact Jon. But at some point, enough time has gone by, and you got Dominic Reyes waiting in line for a title shot. So that's what I'm expecting to happen. But I think that there was, some consideration that, hey, maybe we don't need to book Jon immediately, because we want to see what happens with this heavyweight division.
So if you had to sort of be a betting man, Brett, do you think we see Jon Jones in heavyweight in 2020?
In 2020, yes, I believe it'll happen. I don't know. I don't think it'll be his next fight, but I would guess, yes, that he will fight at heavyweight next year.
Fascinating stuff. Well, speaking of sort of older fighters and making returns and things happening, we did see recently that Ariel Helwani interviewed Nick Diaz in a very, very interesting interview for the Helwani show, ESPN MMA. And I love the tweet you put out, Brett. I'm just going to read it out here for people that missed out. You said, just my personal opinion here, I have no interest in Nick Diaz fighting at the moment, no interest in seeing it or even talking about it. I will always be a fan of his, if I'm allowed to say that as a journalist. It was a very, very well put tweet that I think brought an opinion that I was very happy to see from an elite journalist like yourself. Give us your thoughts on sort of what you saw when you saw that interview with Nick, and what sort of made you want to put that tweet out into the universe.
Well, I think it was, Nick's first interview in a long time. So it just bears, people want reactions from it, and I do feel like when these stories happen, and these interviews happen, like, I'm involved in the sport, obviously. I cover it. I'm having conversations about it on a daily basis. And so, I imagine people are looking at me and saying, well, what did you make of this? They're interested in my thoughts on it. And I thought about it for a while, and it was not just the interview with Ariel. It's also, if you've been following Nick's social media at all, you just know that the guy is, he's living a lifestyle that's not really conducive to a professional fighter, and he's free to do that. I'm not sitting here, wanting to have like a conversation about whether Nick is living his life correctly. That's not something I'm saying at all. I just feel like when you combine some of the stuff you see on his social media, and then you combine sort of the state of mind that it seemed like he was in with Ariel, it just doesn't look like a guy who's ready to fight someone, let alone fight someone like George Masvidal, who could go and fight for the title tomorrow and possibly win it. We're talking about perhaps the greatest welterweight on the planet right now. If you gave Jorge that opportunity against Colby or against Usman, I don't know if he'd be favored to win, but he'd be in the fight, right? That'd be a legitimate fight. So you're talking about one of the top 4 welterweights in the world, and Nick Diaz is going to come back with all of this stuff that we've seen on his social media and in that interview with her. I don't think that that's a fight that we should be entertaining. I don't think it's a fight that we should be pushing for. I'm rooting for Nick Diaz. I want to see good things happen in his life, but I don't look at him and think that he's in a real position to fight a very, very elite welterweight right now. And I hear the argument of, well, if he were to get a fight, then maybe he would get into camp and it would be the best thing for him. And I understand that theory, but it's kind of a weak theory, you know. I mean, you don't book someone to fight based on that. You know, I mean, I heard the same thing about BJ Penn. You know, that BJ Penn is a safer individual and he's better and he's healthier when he has a fight. And you know, it got to a point where I think all of us sort of realized that, like, even if that's true, that's not a good reason to book somebody to fight. So maybe that's still fresh in my head. But I got nothing against Nick Diaz. Obviously, if he does want to come back and compete, I mean, he's in a position where he can and he can make money. So if it's what's best for his life, I mean, the decision is his. But just me personally, I'm not going to go out there and say, yeah, I'd love to see a fight against him and Masvidal, because I wouldn't. I don't want to see that fight right now.
Yeah, and not to be like hypocritical, because you know we're all in the media business, but do you find it bizarre that this story has sort of gotten as much legs as it has? Because in that interview, I never really heard anything clear from Nick Diaz about wanting to fight Masvidal. He kind of said a few things like, oh, you don't talk about my brother like that. But when Errol asked him if he wants to fight, he said pretty clearly no. And then after the fight, he's sort of putting out on Instagram like, hey, Jorge, like, let's give them what they want and stuff. And Masvidal is, of course, biting and saying, hey, yeah, I'd love to fight. Why wouldn't he? You know, that's a money fight for him. But it just doesn't seem like the UFC's interested. I don't really get the clear feeling that Nick is interested. And it's almost like at this point, it's just kind of talking about nothing, about a fight that we all know really isn't going to happen. The guy that's next for Masvidal has got to be the winner of Colby and Usman, right?
Yeah, and if Nick wanted to fight, I mean, he could have gotten to fight any time over the last few years. You know, like this is not one of those like he says these things, some things about like, well, you got to talk to the UFC. It's almost kind of like what we've heard from Nate, where it's like he sort of infers that the reason he hasn't been fighting is because of the UFC. But I'm telling you right now, the UFC has wanted Nick to fight, and they have. I mean, I'm not saying that they've given him a phone call and said, hey, we'll give you absolutely anything you want, who you want, where you want, as much money as you want. I mean, obviously they haven't written him a blank check, but they have engaged him numerous times on trying to get him to fight. And so now because Nick happened to sit down for one interview and say, no one says they're going to baptize my little brother, now this is a fight we're talking about. I do agree with you that it's a little bit irresponsible on the media's part, because I don't think there's a lot of juice behind that fight actually happening. Now, if Nick were to go to the UFC's office tomorrow and walk up to Dana White and said he wanted to fight, I mean, that could change pretty quickly. But, I mean, this is not, to me, a very, very strong, realistic chance of this happening as of right now, you know? But that's just how the media world we live in. It's not just the MMA media. It's all media. If he goes out and says, you know, you don't baptize my brother, and Jorge responds, then, you know, there's going to be news articles about it. You're going to see it on Twitter, and it's going to build up a little bit. But I don't think that fight's going to happen.
I almost feel like that interview with Ariel kind of puts a few roadblocks in the UFC's way, because Nick doesn't look the healthiest there. So it's kind of hard to build a fight like that, but I'm sure they could figure out a way. Just quickly, you mentioned what's next for Masvidal. I'm just wondering, Brett, there's still a lot of people thinking that if Conor McGregor comes back January 18th, he could potentially build to a fight with Masvidal in April. Do you believe that could be possibly a scenario if Cerrone does in fact fight January 18th against Cerrone and gets that big win?
I don't think so. I don't know who wants that fight. Does UFC want that fight? I mean, because Conor McGregor is a great fighter, for sure. Don't get me wrong, but you know, Jorge Masvidal is legitimately bigger than him. You know, and he's on a roll. And is that the big fight that you would put together, knowing that? I mean, the way Jorge's fighting right now, he could definitely knock out Conor McGregor. You know, I mean, anybody can any one of these guys can knock out anybody at any given moment, of course. But that's a tough fight, is what I'm saying for Conor. You know, so if Conor does come back and he fights Cowboy and he wins, I mean, why would he fight Jorge? I mean, he can wait to find out who wins, you know, in March or April between Tony and Khabib. And if it's Tony, I would imagine that Tony and Conor would fight this summer. And if it's Khabib, well, then Khabib takes the summer off because of Ramadan, and then maybe he would have to consider things. But even then, I would think that he would fight Nate for the third time over Masvidal. I actually do. I think that you know, he always talked about we'll have a third fight. You know, the series is 1-1. I could, in a weird way, I could see it more possible that he would fight Nate in the summer and then try to win the title against Khabib in the fall, if he was really going to fight 3 times this year.
No, absolutely right. Now, as we wrap up, Brett, we really appreciate it. You're at the airport. You carved out some time for the boys. Absolutely, one of the best guys in the business. Just as we wrap up, why hasn't the UFC announced this January 18th fight with Conor McGregor and Donald Cerrone? When we spoke to Dana White at UFC 244, he claimed he hasn't even called up Cerrone for that fight. We find that that's a very hard thing to believe. What do you know about the situation? Why is the UFC taking so long in announcing a fight that's not that far away?
Why is the UFC taking so long to announce it, or why is Conor taking so long to make it official, right? Because I'm telling you right now, if the UFC had a signed contract from Conor McGregor, Donald Cerrone is signing his contract within 30 seconds, right? I mean, by the time it faxes over and it's done printing out, I mean, he's already put his name on it, right? The UFC is not going to announce a fight for Conor, a comeback fight, a fight that they know that will get the world's attention unless they have a signed bout agreement. So I think that's your simplest answer. They don't have a signed contract with Conor's name on it that says he's fighting Cowboy on January 18th. And until they do, I would expect things to be kind of quiet. And then the second that he signs it, then they're going to blast it, and we're going to, it'll be Conor McGregor Day again, and everybody will be talking about it. But until they have a signed contract from the guy, you're not going to hear them really talk about that fight, because they don't really want. I don't think that and Dana White's done this his really, I mean, there are exceptions to this, but he's really done this his whole career. He doesn't really like to talk about fights that aren't done yet, because he doesn't want to get people's hopes up or expectations that this fight is happening, especially on a specific date, and then it doesn't happen. Especially something like Conor McGregor that he knows is going to be a really, really big deal, and a lot of people are going to be talking about it. So you're just not going to hear from those guys until they got a signed deal.
Well, there you guys go. It's going to be, if you were a betting man, do you think it happens, Brett? January 18th, Conor McGregor return? I'm
optimistic. Yeah, I think it'll happen. But with Conor, it's tough. It's always tough to call, because he's his own man, and they can't, unlike some other people in the UFC, they can't just kind of like throw a little bit more money his way, or, rake him over the coals, or kind of pressure him. Like, Conor does what Conor wants. I mean, we've seen that for years now. So it's up to him, man. But if he signs that bout agreement, then that fight's going to be official within seconds,
Well, I'll tell you what, the year is not over just yet, and Brett's got a bunch of great content dropping ahead of UFC 245. Of course, check it out, ESPN MMA, and follow the man at Okamoto ESPN on Twitter for all the big fight announcements. Brett, a real honor having you on this program. Can't wait to see you in person at some point next year. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to us on Submission Radio.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys are listening to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
All right, guys. Our next guest is the number 7th ranked lightweight fighter in the world, now gearing up to represent New Zealand in the UFC Auckland, announced February 23rd. He joins us on the show, the Hangman himself, Dan Hooker, with that classic shiner on his eye, as per usual, man. Welcome back to Submission Radio. How are you, Dan?
Birthmark.
Birthmark? Is it?
Birthmark. That's what little do people know. I don't correct people because you got to correct them every 5 minutes. But I'll correct you now. So then we've settled it for the rest of eternity.
What?
Birthmark. I don't have a continuous black eye.
What an idiot I've been. I never realized it was a birthmark. I wish you corrected us earlier, Dan, rather than letting us walk around town looking like idiots. I thought it was just like Dan Hooker's so hard training. He's just always got that shiner, but it's a birthmark.
He's always got a black eye.
Yeah, like Rich Franklin.
No, I'm birthmark. Oh. You stand corrected.
Well, I'll tell you what, chicks dig scars. So you would have gotten a lot of chicks back in the day. This guy, another man to mess with, and in high school walking around with a black eye. But it's great to have you on the show, man. Now that we've cleared the record, tell us, what has life been like since that dominating win at UFC 243 at Marvel Stadium? I mean, what a huge moment for you. So many fans happy for you. What was it like coming home and enjoying that win after the whole Melbourne experience?
Yeah, like, it was quite good. It's been a little bit of time off with the family, but I came back and got pretty much straight back into my coaching. I had a lot of fighters when I got back. So the day before I left on the Monday. I had my last training on the Sunday, and then I had 2 fighters fight that afternoon on the Sunday, the night before fighters. And so it was all pretty much back to work when I got back to New Zealand. Like, it wasn't much time. When you get back in the gym and you're back to holding pads and back to coaching, back to, yelling at people and back to going to shows and driving around the country, it's very hard to, get carried away and taken off with that sort of thing. So I got straight back in the gym, straight back into coaching and got back to normal pretty damn quick.
Well, superstar in Melbourne, and you come home and do everything that you usually do. But I mean, in terms of perception and fans, I think you got a lot of them at UFC 243. A lot of people really impressed with your performance overall. Does anything feel different? Like, do you notice there's more people sort of mentioning you on social media, more people sort of giving you the credit that you deserve, more people approaching you on the streets and sort of wanting to take a photo with you, or is it sort of the same as usual?
Nah, I think it's pretty much the same as usual. I think more people. I think the only thing that's changed is more people tell me how shit I am. Now that I'm
Who's telling you that?
top 10. Now that I'm top 10 on the world, people just tell you how shit you are. Just people on the internet. Let's say. It's a bit of a mix. You're thinking the whole time like, I can't wait till I'm one of the elite fighters in the world. People will, show me some respect. Then you get elite fighter and like, oh, you suck. You're terrible. You couldn't be worse. But hey, that's just the game we play.
Yeah, of course. I think perception is something hard to kind of quantify. It's not a tangible thing, but I definitely notice everybody from, even fighters and media people and media personalities, everyone is kind of like, oh my God, they're on the Dan Hooker bandwagon. Do you feel like it might be easier for you to get fights now? Because I feel like every time you had an impressive win, you'd have a call out, and it just seemed tough for you to get opponents. You'd have to wait for a guy like an Al who's like, hey, I want to go to Australia, so yeah, why not? Do you feel like now that you got that number next to your name, it's going to be a bit easier to get the guys that you want?
Yeah, like once you get to this kind of position, like top 10, it just becomes about positioning yourself for a title shot, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for. We're all here to be champion and to wear the belt. So it's all about getting yourself the right fights that move you forward up those rankings and get you closer to a title shot. So, having a ranking next to your name definitely does help with that and continue to move you higher and higher up the rankings.
I wonder, how much of a factor do you think your size plays when guys are considering whether to fight you or not? Because I know that after the Iaquinta fight, a lot of people discuss how, man, like he was just so much bigger and so much longer than Al. And I almost get a sense that when guys are looking at the rankings and who's available, they look at a guy like yourself and they're like, that's a pretty stiff test right there.
It just comes down, like, it's all... I don't think my size, that's got much of anything to do. I think I'm one of the smaller cutters still in the division. Like, I don't lose a lot of weight. I'm just, I just have a good frame and a good size frame and kind of coming into my own and knowing how to use the frame. But it's just got to make sense now for these guys. Like, it's got to make sense in a business sense. And coming into Auckland, coming into my hometown, number 7th ranked, it's going to be, if I can get one of these higher ranked guys and push it towards a main event, then that'll likely draw one of the bigger names down here. So that'll be the hardest thing is drawing a bigger name fighter down to this corner of the world.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it. The 23rd of February is going to be the fight night in Auckland. A lot of people are already saying you'll be in the main event. Of course, they're trying to figure out who this dance partner is, as I'm sure you are. You mentioned now you got a number next to your name. Now you got the main event next to your name. It's going to be easier to find an opponent. Yet I still see you on Twitter trying to figure out who's going to be fighting you. How many people have you had actually put up their hand, or the UFC sort of try to put a few names in front of you? Have you seen anybody officially propose to you to main event with you in New Zealand?
Nah, I haven't actually. I haven't been in touch with the UFC since my fight. UFC hasn't been in touch with me. But I feel like it'll come. It'll come soon, and I'll wait for the UFC to get in touch with me. propose a name for that fight. And all I can say is he better be higher up the rankings than me. That's all I want.
I mean, for a long time, you were kind of like your own matchmaker in the sense that it seemed like the UFC dropped the ball a little bit, and you would go on social media and actively seek opponents out that would then go to the UFC and say, all right, I'll fight this guy. Do you feel like you're past that stage, or do you think if the UFC come with you with some average options, you'll be back out on social media trying to lure some new names into the mix?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I still deal with the UFC myself, and I still deal with them directly. And I've never asked for a change of opponent or complained about an opponent or wanted a different opponent. And that's partly, in fact, because the UFC has always approached me with like good matches. I've always come at me with, guys that have, they put on exciting fights. They see me and they see me as an exciting fighter. So they always match me with other exciting fighters and the shows that entertain the fans. I think if you're one of the more boring guys, like stylistically, or you don't go out there and finish and put on exciting fights, then then they'll chuck you with the the wrestlers or the Kazakhstanis no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
Because they put you with someone like that, it just makes to win, an exciting guy has to fight boring to get the win. And at the end of the day, this is entertainment. This is to put bums on seats and put on an exciting fight. So I've never had to argue with the UFC and about an opponent because, they just throw names at me like, Ali Kuna and Barboza and, all of these guys. They're all action-packed fights.
Do you expect to be the main event of this card? I know a lot of people looking, hey, Israel is obviously the champion and he's a huge name, but let's be honest, he's a pay-per-view fighter and the UFC needs a solid Kiwi name to headline this card. I know you say you haven't been in touch with them, but is that your expectation? I feel like there's no one else that makes more sense than yourself, Dan.
Nothing's guaranteed until it actually, gets signed on the dotted line. I think with the right opponent, it could definitely headline. Lightweight is kind of the money division with these big name guys. Ferguson, Conor, Khabib, Cowboy, Gagey. Like the division is just stacked with names, and it seems to be one of the toughest divisions to kind of cut your teeth in. So generally, this would a high rank lightweight fight. Generally main events, Felder Vic was a main event. Kevin Lee Alaquina was a main event. Like it would definitely be warranted, and especially in my, my hometown where I had such a good run. Two fights in Auckland, both very good finishes. So it bodes well that this will be main event.
In this climate with city kickboxing just having a tremendous recent, I guess, year and more so, New Zealand has been getting so much airtime, but obviously it's been forever since they had a card. What does it mean for you specifically, and I guess for New Zealand in general, for them to return and do this event in Auckland, especially, if you end up main eventing, which I imagine will be special for you?
Yeah, it'll be crazy, man. It'll be something that I thought about when I first got on the card. Like it was when Jamie Tahuna was fighting in the main event, and I remember looking up to him and thinking one day maybe I'll be in that spot. If everything goes well, maybe I'll be able to headline a card in Auckland. So to go from the bottom of the prelims making your debut to main eventing and headlining against one of the top 5 fighters in the world will be an incredible opportunity.
Now, we know you tried to call out Dustin Poirier after your fight. He said no, but, obviously he still doesn't have a fight set up. Donald Cerrone was going to be another guy that we wanted to see you fight, but it looks like he's fighting Conor McGregor on January 18th. So he's out of the picture as well. So who are a couple of other names that sort of are on your radar for this main event? You've got guys like Justin Gaethje, but he seems like he's wanting to wait for a title shot. Who does that leave for you in terms of potential opponents?
Yeah, I think with the, I think it all comes down. There'll be a lot of guys, that are thinking they might still be in with a chance with the Conor McGregor fight. Gagey, Poirier, Cowboy, Felder. They'll all still be sitting there waiting, with the big what if. What if he pulls a U-turn and Cowboy gets injured and then they're the backup. So no one's going to commit to fighting me when they potentially could still get that matchup. That would be quite bad in a business sense to commit to that. But once I feel like the Conor McGregor one gets announced, Conor versus Cowboy is, the one that everyone's talking about. If that fight gets signed, then it frees a lot of these guys up. And they'll be more open. Gagey, that'll still be another fight. That'll be a fight I love. I feel like me and Gagey headlining Auckland, that fight sells it out. That fight packs Vector Arena. I doubt there would be a empty seat in the whole place if we could get that fight across the line. But yeah, like you say, he's the backup for the Ferguson-Khabib. That matchup goes down. Those guys are pretty prone to injury or falling off the card. So it comes down to whether he actually wants to get in there and mix it up. But anyone ranked ahead of me, there's a few of them, and a lot of them don't have matches, and I would happily accept any one of them.
Just on that, do you think this Conor McGregor fight happens? Do you think he actually returns January 18th? I know you've mentioned before you thought he may never return. Do you think it's actually going to go down?
Yeah. I feel like Cowboy's the right fight. I feel like stylistically, Cowboy's a pretty good matchup for him. He's a big name. He's still ranked number 5, and stylistically, that fight lends itself towards Conor. I feel like Cowboy struggles against southpaws with good footwork who can turn him because he is such a straight line forward and back fighter. I think the fight makes sense. I think it's going to happen. I think we'll see that fight. The Conor and Cowboy fight matched up.
I feel like it's MMA's worst kept secret. Like, everybody expects that fight to happen. We're just waiting on official announcement. We're waiting for documents to be signed. I feel like it's interesting though, right? Like, Conor McGregor, he always kind of goes for these massive challenges, and here he is kind of working his way back up the ladder for the first time in a long time. And people are already sort of looking at it as like, well, Cerrone is a very favorable matchup for him. Do you think that in a sense adds pressure and heightens the stakes? Because if you can't get past a guy like Cerrone, it raises a lot of questions about where he would even go afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. But they're all at that level, at that elite level. They're all, incredibly risky fights. But I feel like this, if Conor can get past Cowboy, then that solidifies his spot as the guy that gets the next title shot. Like, the only person in the running besides that is Gagey as well. And, he's only on a couple of fight win streak as well, 3-fight win streak. Having his last big win being knocked out Cowboy. So that's like his claim to the title shot. I knocked out Cowboy. Well, if Conor goes out there and knocks Cowboy out, well, then that puts him up, Then it solidifies Conor will be the next guy to fight for the title, and then Gagey will kind of be left waiting in the wings. But yeah, I would, if he was really wanting the challenge or really wanting to solidify it, I think Conor should have come back and fought Gagey. I would have taken Gagey over Cowboy. You want to beat a guy that just got knocked out, or you want to beat a guy that's coming off all these very impressive knockout wins? And I would go for the Gagey fight 10 out of 10 times.
It'll be funny. Cerrone beats McGregor, and then he's got no choice but to headline Auckland with you, Dan. McGregor, Dan, in Auckland. No choice. I was going to say another man that sort of is lurking in the wings is Kevin Lee. He got that big win at UFC 244. Is he on your radar as potentially somebody that you'd be happy to headline in February in Auckland with?
At the end of the day, if they came to me with that name, then and they say that all these other guys are busy, then this is the fight to make. But I can't see why I don't get any of the guys I've mentioned before who are ranked higher. You know, they're all sitting out. They're all free. You know, they all don't have a fight. We have to fight. We have to stay busy. This is how we we make a living and pay our bills. There's no reason why one of those boys won't be able to front up and fight.
You know what's interesting? Before, like, you're talking about, like, you would rather Justin Gaethje as opposed to Cerrone, which I think a lot of people look at as Gaethje as the tougher option, but that's, I guess, your mentality. And I feel like that's kind of the mentality across the board at City Kickboxing. Like, everyone's just always going for the toughest challenges. You got Israel saying, like, oh, I'll fight Yoel Romero, who a lot of people kind of feel like is stylistically a really, really tough test for Israel. What do you think about that matchup potentially coming together, especially with Costa being injured for the meantime?
Yeah, I want to see that fight. I want to see Israel versus Yoel. I think, that's a fight all the fans want to see. I think the only people that don't want to see that is the UFC because, you know, Yoel's coming off a few decision losses. But yeah, come on, let's be honest. That's the fight we all want to see.
I mean, there's a bunch of stuff going on at City Kickboxing right now. You got Alex Volkanovski fighting Max Holloway. In December, you got Kai Kara France fighting UFC 245 as well. A lot of people sort of not giving Alex much of a shot outside of Australia in this Max Holloway fight. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are you expecting to see from this performance that Alex is going to put on in Las Vegas for this card, for this title match?
Yeah, that's a difficult fight for Holloway. You know, Alex goes out there, he's a grinder, he's tough. I feel like, he has the style to give the style of anyone to give him the biggest problems in that division. I feel like Alex's ability to mix in the takedown and his power on the feet will have to be respected. You know, he's not a guy that's gonna just sit at range getting picked apart. You know, Alex will come in, he'll walk that range down, he'll chuck him against the cage, he'll take him down, he'll wear him out. Alex is a 5-round fighter. He's a grinder. And, I just can't wait for him to get in there and surprise the world and shock the world and just show him the level that he's on.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's all happening. City Kickboxing absolutely dominating. And, of course, guys, the Combat Academy, Dan's gym, located in Auckland. We hear great things are happening there. If you're local from the area, make sure to go down there because, Dan, I believe you do a few classes yourself there and you run things down there. So I imagine a lot of fans are coming through there wanting to meet the legend Dan Hooker himself.
Well, I teach more than a few classes there. A week, holding pads pretty much every night. Come down. Everyone's welcome.
Well, there you guys go. Of course, follow the man on Instagram at Dan Hangman and Twitter at Dan the Hangman. He is one of the most exciting guys in the lightweight division. We can't wait to see what happens with this Auckland Fight Night card, Dan. It's gonna be very exciting to see who you get from this draw. We'll have you back on the show to discuss it. Thank you so much for jumping onto Submission Radio.
Cheers, lads. Thank you very much.
Bye.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Our next guest is coming off a win over Jillian Robertson and is already set to take on Roxanne Modafferi, UFC 246, one of the hottest prospects in the women's UFC flyweight division. The future is now. The future is here. Maycee Barber, welcome back to Submission Radio. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
We are doing very, very well. Thank you so much for joining us. We see you're in your car. There's people doing jumping jacks outside, but of course we're the ones doing jumping jacks, Maycee, because it's good to have you back on the show. It's been just over a week ago since the anniversary of your official UFC debut. So where you finished, by the way, Hannah Cifers in the second round in your home state of Colorado. First off, we have to congratulate you because we love a good anniversary here on Submission Radio. And secondly, how did you reflect on that occasion? Did you celebrate that milestone at all?
I believe it was a Sunday, so I was just, getting ready to start another week of training, and that was, it was about the time that I had just gotten official confirmation for the fight for January 18th. So kind of just just a lot of excitement, and it's crazy to see where I've come from. So I'm happy.
Do you ever look at it sort of like that's one anniversary? Do you ever look a year from now sort of where you'll be? Like, do you think you'll potentially be, celebrating, I don't know, or preparing for a championship fight, maybe looking back on a title win? What do you think the next year is going to be like for you?
I do, I actually said that, look at where I've come from in just a year, like a year ago, from where I was to where I am now. And I can just imagine, where I'm going to be 1 year from November 10th of this year. So
because I know you like to set alarms and plans and calendars.
Yep.
When do you sit down and do that for 2020? Have you already done that, or is this something that you're looking to do once the year is over? What's the procedure like?
Well, I always keep track of things and I always plan things out, but right now the countdown is for January 18th, and that fight coming up. We have just under 9 weeks, so we're like 8.5 weeks right now. So I have that on my phone, and then also the other countdown to 23. But yeah, that's it. Those are my goals, and those are what I'm really focused on right now.
Nice. Well, of course, the task at hand is Roxanne Modafferi in January at UFC 246. So I guess the big question is, how did this fight actually come together?
Well, we knew that I wanted to fight January 18th, and then we also knew that a lot of the girls in the top 10, they're already booked. So we kind of took a look at the ones that were available, and we were offered Lauren, and then Lauren was taken away, and then we were offered Roxy, and then I said yes. And when I was offered Roxy, they actually were like, we have Roxy, and she's already in. So it's kind of like, well, we're in too. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about.
I mean, it's a really exciting fight, and we can't wait to see it. But I guess some people would be questioning, why not Paige VanZant? Why wasn't her name sort of coming across your desk? It seems like the fight that everybody wanted to see. What happened there? Did the UFC at all try to pursue that one for you?
It did, yeah. They offered it to Paige at 125. She said no. From what I heard, she said she wanted to fight at 115, but she would need more time. So as far as I know, it's offered to her at 125 when she wants to take the fight at 125. And other than that, it's kind of like, I'm just going to keep doing what I do with my career. And when she decides to fight, we'll fight.
When I mean, there's so much steam behind this fight, you and Paige, and obviously she sort of put out that list where it was like she tagged everyone in the division except for yourself. Do you think that her wanting to fight at 115 was sort of a legitimate reason, or do you think it's because she didn't really want to take the fight with yourself?
Honestly, I don't think she could ever make 115 again, and it's been said multiple times that, her family would not support that, and I can understand it. I mean, like, the cut to 115 does not make sense for her, especially with her new addition. But honestly, I've moved past it. I'm focused on moving up through the ranks, and when she decides to fight, if she decides to fight, then I'll still be here, and I'm totally down to go and beat her up. But until then, like, I'm really not worried about it. I don't care either way.
You're moving on to bigger and better, right? Because you're already ranked ahead of her in the rankings.
My career,
anyway.
yeah. My career will be successful no matter what, if I beat her up or not. That was just kind of like a bonus, like, beat her up and improve a point. But that's it.
I mean, Roxanne, she is legitimately someone that's been in the game for a really long time, and not really someone that anyone could really hate, because she's just such a nice person. She loves her Dragon Ball Z. She conducts herself in a very professional way. What do you sort of imagine this build up towards this fight being like, against Roxanne, instead of, potentially heated fight week against a person like Paige VanZant?
Honestly, I agree with you. I've kind of seen Roxy here and there in Vegas, and she's happy, and I've said this on multiple interviews, like, she's just happy to be there. And she is such a, she's been there for so long within the sport. She has so many fights. She has like 39 fights, I think. And I don't know if that includes her amateur career or not. She's been around for a lot of fights and a lot of through a lot of the women's MMA. So it's really a very historic fight, I think, for us, because we're taking someone who has pretty much gone and done and seen it all. And then you have someone who's been working their whole life just to be where they are right now. And I'm super young and super new in my career. So you kind of have like the new and the old. And I think people are going to be shocked. You know, they expect, they're like, oh, well, you're fighting her and she's got so much experience over you. But what they don't realize is I've been working my whole life and I'm 21, but that's like 17 years of work that I've put into this. So I'm excited, honestly. And I'm just ready to go out there and as always, finish a fight. But yeah, it's definitely a fun experience for me. For sure.
I mean, obviously, like a lot of people looking at this Paige VanZant fight, but comparing these two challenges, do you believe Roxanne's a much bigger sort of challenge than a fight with someone like a Paige VanZant?
Oh, absolutely. Roxanne is way better of a fighter than Paige VanZant, and there's a lot of women out there who are a tougher fight. Paige VanZant just did the marketing well, you know, and that was because the UFC got behind her on that. But like I've said multiple times, she didn't hold up her end of the deal, and she didn't continue to progress as a fighter. She just continued to progress on the more marketing and media side of that. So, yeah, there's a lot more girls that have been working their butts off a lot more than Paige has.
It's interesting, like you were sort of mentioning the like Roxanne and her experience. For anyone who's interested in the stats, she's 37. Well, you're still only 21, Maycee, and it's a fascinating storyline. It's got that kind of old lion versus the young lion, I guess, narrative to it. And obviously, your nickname is the Future. If you beat someone like Roxanne, or I should say, when you beat someone like Roxanne, do you feel like it sort of solidifies you as the Future, sort of beating a girl who has fought in all these organizations, fought some of the best women in the world, and then here comes someone like yourself and sort of, despite her experience, comes in and sort of, I guess, takes the scalp, so to speak?
I think it does. Yeah, Roxanne, she's 37. I was 5 years old. ESPN, I believe, came out with an article. I was 5 years old when she started fighting. So,
oh, wow.
Just for me to hear that, I was like, oh man, wow, that's crazy. And then, you know, like all the guys on the team, when I told them that, I was like, did you realize that I was 5 when she started fighting? And they were like, wow, like it's just kind of something crazy to think about. And I think it's a fight that covers pretty much every aspect and every year of women's MMA, because, you know, she came from the very beginning. You know, she fought Liz Carmouche and a lot of the earlier fighters, and now she's fighting someone who is like I'm the youngest one in the UFC as far as I know. So like she fought all those girls, and now she's fighting here. So I think that's really cool. But yeah, I definitely feel like I'm just a completely different. I'm the new age of women's MMA, if that makes sense. Like, I am what women's MMA is going to be someday. You know, like, it's continuing to evolve into way more technical and way better of fights, I guess, than we'd had in earlier women's MMA. So I just feel like I'm the new side of that. So, yeah, I'm excited for it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I'm excited just sort of hearing you talking about the fight. You know, you're someone who's known for obviously, you know, being an exciting fighter, being violent, and, you know, really going for the finish and achieving that finish as well. I'm wondering, like, as people who have never fought, what is that feeling like when you are getting the finish in those last few seconds before the fight is stopped? And also, is it in any, I mean, you're a professional, you're going to go out there and do your job, but is it in any way in the back of your mind somewhat harder to brutalize someone like a Roxanne, who is just such a, you know, freaking nice person?
Ooh, the way I look at it is, if they had the chance to do that to me, they would, you know, and that's the way I look at it in every situation. And I also view it as it's me or them, you know, it's either I'm going to win and continue on progressing in my career, or they're going to win and progress their career. And I have a lot of goals to reach, and I have a lot of things that I want to accomplish within the sport. And as far as the finisher mentality, that's just something that I think I have deep down within me. You know, I was born with this And I've created it. You know, you create it through a lot of hard work. It's not necessarily that I just go out there and I try to hurt girls all the, like, when I'm in the fight. You know, I train for that. You know, I want to see that, all the training and the hard work, I want to see it pay off. So I think that it's a combination of everything, honestly. But that's, you know, that finisher is not something that everyone has, and I know that I have it, and clearly I've shown that.
Well, you talk about wanting to be on big cards, and here you are on UFC 246. It's your pay-per-view debut, and this is also a step for you from going from fight night fighter to a pay-per-view fighter. I mean, how does it feel? I mean, you mentioned countdowns. How does it feel to have that countdown to your pay-per-view debut in January?
I'm excited. Obviously it's new. But I don't expect anything too different other than, you know, it's just an honor to be able to even be, one, in the UFC, but two is to be on a pay-per-view where, you know, it's not just people that can just tune in and watch. Now they're actually like, oh, if you want to watch it, you have to pay to see it, and you have to have a reason. You know, people aren't just going to pay for something that they don't really care about. So that's kind of an honor, is to know that people actually care enough to want to buy and pay to see you fight. So it's exciting.
I feel like it's also kind of a milestone event, you know, the fact that in your career, going from a fight night fighter to now you're moving up to being a pay-per-view fighter, and the way you're sort of progressing through the rankings, it seems like it's sort of a sign of things to come in the future. But I'm wondering, what do you think of the fact that you might be fighting on the same card as Conor McGregor? At the moment, all signs are pointing to him returning on that card.
Honestly, that was a big dream of mine. You know, you never know when Conor's going to be done fighting, honestly. And that is something that I could not have asked to be on a card than with Conor McGregor. Like, that was a goal of mine and a dream of mine. And I didn't want to get too invested into that and, you know, just like completely have my mindset set on that, because you cannot tell Conor McGregor what he's going to do. So, and you can't just plan on it. So I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, but that's definitely been something that I've really wanted to be able to do. And I feel like it's part of history. You know, he's one of the biggest in the UFC, and he is one of the biggest in the UFC and in a lot of the fight world. And to be able to share a card with him and be on that is incredible.
Did you ask to be on this card specifically because he was on the card, or was that just the date that the UFC proposed to you?
No, I asked for this date, and I kind of had the understanding that he was going to be on the card, but I didn't, again, like I said, I didn't want to be like, all right, he's going to be the main event, but that's kind of like what I heard. So, yeah.
You were like, oh yeah, January 18th. Like I don't know, that sounds like a pretty good date. Connor's on that card. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh yeah, fancy that.
Yeah, it's like,
kind of sort of knew it was going to be that way, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. You know more about what's going on with the UFC than the UFC like to admit they know themselves. So that's the best bit about it. Let me ask you, you know, obviously as media, we've been to a few Conor McGregor cards and they're crazy. You know, everybody's got their eyes on the card, and also the fighters on the card benefit from more sort of eyeballs during the pay-per-view. But what are some of the other things you look forward to sort of being on the same card as Conor McGregor? Like, for example, are you looking at possibly learning something from him, maybe crossing paths with him, seeing how a guy like him handles, you know, the attention that he gets, considering, you know, you're the future and you might be in that position one day?
You pretty much named a lot of things that go on in my head on a daily basis. Yeah. I always try to learn something from, you know, people who have made it big in the sport. I also try to learn everything from as many people as I can. But in terms of like just the energy and the energy of the people surrounding it and people watching, but also I like to see how fighters like Conor McGregor carry themselves, like throughout fight week, or if it ever happens to be in the back, or however it works out, like to be able to see how other fighters carry themselves throughout fight week and the night of the fight is something that I always try to do. And then also just to know that if he knows that I'm on the same card as him and knowing that he's watching my fight, that's also a goal. that's also something that I like to think about, because I want to impress people that I look up to. So, yeah, just all around a good situation.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure he'll see this interview and sort of know that you're going to be on that card. I was just going to quickly say, he's fighting Donald Cerrone. A lot of people are saying, it might be a surprise. Cerrone might shock the world and beat a guy like Conor McGregor in 2020 after everything that he's been through outside of fighting. What is your early prediction for this fight? Do you believe Conor McGregor makes the big return and beats Cerrone and then maybe even goes on to another potential title run?
I don't know. That's a hard one for me to answer. And honestly, I've been so focused on my own fight that I couldn't give you a technical breakdown of that fight. I am torn because I like Conor McGregor as a fighter, and I've never met him in person. I know Cowboy, and I definitely have pulled for him every fight that I've ever watched of his. He's another person that I've looked up to in my career. When I made my debut in the UFC, he was the main event, right? He was the main event. When he fight
Mike Perry.
Or no, he wasn't the main event. He was co-main event. My bad. But yeah, so I mean, he's someone that I've followed my entire career, and I really look up to him as well. So I'm torn on that one.
Appreciate the time, Maycee. That's no need to apologize. We appreciate the time, by the way, so we'll let you go soon because you're sitting here giving us a time from your car. But I was just wondering, obviously, someone that you train with, Ben Askren, that was a massive sort of storyline the last sort of year or so, you training at Rufus Sport, and you went there to sort of, improve your wrestling and get some of the best teachings you can. But obviously he retired the other day. Kind of shocked us a little bit. A bit of a surprise for the MMA community. What was your reaction to Ben retiring?
I wasn't surprised because I talked with him before the Damian Maia fight, and he kind of gave me I may or may not. And then before he went on Ariel's show, he told me the day before that he was officially done. And honestly, I just put out a post today, or maybe this morning, saying, he may be done with the competitive side of his career, and it was fun to watch. And, again, another fighter that I look up to. And I hear a lot of people saying, yeah, he's not that good. He got wrecked and he got messed up in the UFC, and he made his statement on that. But like I said, he may be done with the competitive side, but we're not done making history, and I'm honored to have him as a part of making my history and getting this title and winning it.
Yeah, do you feel like in some ways this could, I don't want to say it would take over his legacy or overshadow, but in some ways if he helped you become UFC champion, that could be another chapter in his legacy, if that makes sense?
I agree. I don't think it'll ever overshadow what he's done already in his own career.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Askren is Ben Askren, and his career is something that no one else can overshadow or take away from him. It's his, and that's nobody else can do what he's already done. So, yeah, I think it's just another addition and another chapter in creating and making him continue to be great. I don't know how to explain it. It's not over for him, if that makes sense. He still has many things that he's going to accomplish outside of the sport, and with the help of mine.
How in any way would this sort of affect or change or adjust your training? Because obviously he needs that hip replacement, so I imagine he'll get the surgery and he might be sort of off the mats for a little bit. Does this change things in any way for you? And will he still be in your corner for potentially UFC 246?
I haven't asked him about how it would work. I do really well with learning just by someone explaining to me or telling me what to do. He could totally coach me, and he has before, being able to coach me and tell me how to do things without needing to show him. I have a pretty good understanding, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. And I know he will as well. In terms of my corner, I did ask him, and as far as I know, he'll be out there with me for fight week. So yes, he will be in my corner.
Well, I'll tell you what, we are super pumped to see you at UFC 246, possibly one of the biggest cards of 2020 on January 18th. Just before we wrap, Maycee, a quick prediction if we can. How do you sort of see this pay-per-view debut going in your mind?
Same way all the other ones have. I'm gonna come out, obviously come out with my hand raised, and I do see another finish. You know, I'm never gonna stop fighting for a finish, and I'm gonna keep putting exciting fights out. But yeah, I definitely think that the future is gonna show off and take over.
Yeah, well, I can't wait. I love it. I love it when it's a big pay-per-view. I love it when fighters like you, the future, are on that card and everybody can watch you do your thing. January 18th in Las Vegas, Nevada, UFC 246. Of course, follow Maycee Barber on Twitter and Instagram at Maycee Barber. It's a worthwhile follow. She's always got great content. And Maycee, thank you so much for coming on to Submission Radio, putting up with the jumping jacks guy outside and being in your car for so long and talking to us. It's always a pleasure for us to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your guys' time.
Awesome. Thanks, Maycee. Bye.
Hey, this is Ariel Helwani, and you're listening to Submission Radio with my two favorite mates, Dennis and Casper.
All right, guys, joining us here on the program is a longtime friend of the show who will be taking on Nick Rodriguez at Polaris 12, former Strikeforce and UFC champion. Luke Rockhold is in the house. Welcome back to Submission Radio. Luke, how are you?
Good to be back, boys.
So, Luke, a wild Luke Rockhold appears. Obviously, it's no secret we've been wanting to get you back on the program for a long time. And we see you got the chew toy in hand. We saw recently you were, I believe, on a first class, well, now it's gone, but you were on a first class flight with your dog Lucy, eating some kind of dinner. What's the deal with that, man? Is this the life of Luke Rockhold these days? Flying first class everywhere?
I've never been scared to live my life, you know. What can I say? Can't, you know, and why can't she? You know, if I'm gonna live, she might as well deserve it too. More so, it's the convenience of life. I'm not the type of guy to put my dog underneath plane, and I had to go back and forth to East Coast a little bit. So, yeah, she had her own flatbed flight. Why not?
So I guess, aside from flying first class and living your life, we saw also on Halloween that you went dressed as yourself. Take us into this, man, because when I saw the furry jacket, I thought, is this a regular Luke Rockhold dress up? Is this how you dressed up day to day? Going to get milk, doing the groceries, furry jacket and no t-shirt?
It's typically my coffee run, but you know, every once in a while a double on the night outfit. Same.
We imagine there's a lot of treats, not much tricks when you go outside dressed like that, Luke. How was the Halloween night? Did you have a good Halloween 2019?
We had a pretty good one here. Yeah, no doubt. Definitely took down Hollywood. It was a good time.
What did you were in Hollywood for Halloween? What did that look like?
Looked very similar.
You look like Brad Pitt from Fight Club. It was like Tyler Durden edition of Luke Rockhold, man. I wish I could rock that.
I might have to bring it back sometime, you know. Never know, but we had a good time. It was a good old time here. You know me.
I feel like
I tend to find a way.
I feel like if you're looking for an entrance for Polaris 12 and you want to make some heads turn, the jacket makes a return. What do you think, Luke?
You're gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to just wait and see.
Well, we've obviously got a lot of questions regarding Polaris 12, and we're excited to see you come back, man, because it's been a little while since UFC 239, and of course we've been dying to chat to you about it. You know, how do you look back on that fight? You know, now that it's been quite some time since it.
You know, it was just. It's not exactly what it used to be, I guess, for me. I felt like I rushed things. I wasn't as relaxed. I tried to force an easy way out of the fight, which I thought would be a lot easier. And then I got caught up in that style, and I paid for it. So I believe, obviously, if I fought a different fight, maybe it might be a different story. But I don't have the passion I once had. There's a lot of things that go into fighting, and politically and everything else that goes behind it. So I don't know. I just, it's not the same as it used to be. I don't have the hunger and the passion that I used to have for fighting at this time. So I'm going to take a long break, do some, this is just kind of fun for me. This little Polaris thing, it just happened to pop up. They kept asking me about it, and it's fun. It's an opportunity to go out and kind of keep myself goal oriented kind of go train, but not take it crazy seriously. It's jiu-jitsu, so it's not a fight. It's not a fight. This is not like my comeback. This is jiu-jitsu. And everyone, like everyone wants to call jiu-jitsu fighting, but it's not fighting. It's definitely not.
Yeah. It's fascinating here you talk about sort of not having that passion that you did in the past. When did that sort of begin for you? Because I know that you had a lot of injuries that you had to battle back from. Was it anything to do with that or the layoff? When did you sort of first start feeling like this?
I mean, it's been going on for a while, I'd say. But, I mean, I think once you reach the top, once you reach your goal, and that's in fighting especially, it's like there's a sense of relief. And coming down off that and trying to find that hunger and the passion to keep pursuing this lifestyle, which is fighting, it's tough. I don't know. I've been fighting for a long time. I was the top of the chain with the strike force, but there was still that if and that the what if and all the questions that everyone had. And so to go out there and prove myself in the UFC, to obviously take a hard loss from Vitor and climb back up and take it. It's a different mindset proceeding and following that. And I don't know. I'd say after that, at that point, it was a little different. Everything was a little different.
I mean, you mentioned the fact that you kind of rushed back because you talked to us about the fact that it was a great opportunity. UFC 239 being on the same card as Jon Jones, it all made a lot of sense. But what can you share with us in terms of physically where you were at going into that fight? I mean, I know no fighter is 100% when they go into that octagon, but were you dealing with any physical issues going in there that were sort of substantial?
I was relatively okay. I think it's obviously my leg is the biggest compromise. Having that and dealing with that through training camps, hoping it's going to hold up and having to tape it up and do all that kind of stuff. It kind of like it changed the game plan a little bit where I didn't want to get into a long drawn out brawl and potentially open that up. So, the game, it was just like go. I knew if I got that takedown, I mean, it would have been over. And I overcommitted to that and over pursued that. And then it just kind of got me stuck in that realm. And then I paid for it. So it's a sign for me to kind of like separate myself and move on with some other things at this time.
Well, I'm just wondering, what was it like fighting at 205 compared to middleweight? Were there many differences? Anything that surprised you physically?
They're a lot slower. It's a bit different. For the strong guys too, of course. Me bulking up and going to 205, I'm still a smaller man, believe it or not. I don't care what you look like out there. I mean, I'm struggling to hold like 218. So
wow.
I mean, it's different trying to get up to that weight class. It'd be nice if there was more, but there's not. Cut in the middle of it all. So. Strong guys, tough to manipulate and move around. But I think I didn't catch the whole fight, but it sounded like Jacare had a hell of a time trying to get him down this weekend too.
Absolutely, we want to touch on Jacare, but just wondering with your fight with Jan, there was that kick that he landed. It kind of sounded like it was on the buzzer or just after the buzzer, and I'm just wondering how much of a factor was that for you? How much did that sort of affect you? Because when you were going to the corner, it seemed like it sort of landed pretty flush in that one.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely. You want to deny it in that state, but it definitely clipped the top of my head. So I kind of, it was stupid of me. I knew I had the round kind of locked up, and I was just gonna try to. I didn't really care about the end of the round, and I was too. My muscles were probably filled up with blood and a little slow at the time, and I didn't react as quickly as I could out of the clinch. And then I got clipped at the end of the round when I was just trying to close the round. So my fault, my mistake. I take it, and it happened. Yeah. It definitely changed the second round for sure.
Health-wise, how are you doing at this point? Because like we mentioned, you had the leg for a long time, and from all the reports that we heard, You might have had a broken jaw after the Jan fight, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to get you on video, just to make sure that the sexiness factor is still there, and it's still there. But how are you doing health-wise, and how is the jaw?
I'm well. Yeah, we got a little crack, and had some good people to help me out with it. So everything's fine. So my body's doing pretty well. You know, I've been working pretty hard with Bushesha and a few guys, so that'll tighten up the body a bit. But you know, all in all, I'm good. My body likes it when I don't kick. I think my legs are so fucked up over the years of kicking and battering my legs. They're responding well, you know, with the lack of abuse.
What's it like being back in training? And I'm wondering when you sort of got back, and is it how different is it now training for a grappling comp as opposed to a fight?
It's a lot nicer, you know. And I wouldn't say I'm back in full training or nothing like that, but it's fun. It's fun for me to get out there and just kind of roll around and choke some people out. You know, I don't take this stuff like as seriously as all these other guys. Like it's their job, it's their life. This is just fun for me, and it's just a way to kind of keep myself goal oriented. You know, keep myself driven. So.
I know you're working with Henry Hooft there at the Combat Club. I'm just wondering, what was his thoughts when you mentioned you were going to take a break? Is he sort of on the side of things that wants to see you sort of make a comeback and have another fight?
I wouldn't say that. They're all very receptive to my choices and what I want to do. So just everyone's on board. Everyone's understanding of it. It's not like an easy situation, obviously. So I'm dealing with it exactly how I deal with everything else. You know, I move on and I fucking conquer something else. So
of course,
I try not to get distracted. I don't get deterred, and focus on something that's going to keep me going.
And of course, that is Polaris 12. We saw that you told Ariel Helwani back in October. You have no interest in fighting right now, and obviously you just mentioned that to us as well. But is there much of a change in feeling between October and now, or are you still feeling pretty much the same way? Like, I imagine being in the training room and doing your grappling, getting ready for a competition in Polaris, maybe there's a part of you that's starting to miss it a little bit.
I'm good. I'm good at this time. I got a couple movies going on right now, and it's kind of nice to act it out rather than play it out. So I got a couple companies, and so yeah, I'm just kind of getting settled in, getting some roots back home on the West Coast, and this feels good. Feels good to be back here on the West for a while. Definitely.
So I guess just to clarify this break, because I get the sense that you're a guy who doesn't really like to close doors, and so you don't want to rule out the possibility of a return. But is there a possibility that you know, UFC 239 was the last time that we saw you in the octagon, and sort of what would that depend on for you to potentially come back?
Yeah, anything can happen. Anything could happen. So, you know, it's like you can't fight for the rest of your life. If things change in my mind and I feel like I want to pursue in my body, there's a weight problem with both weight classes being caught in between weight classes, and where you want to go, what makes, you know, where you feel the best. So I'm not going to do it just to go do it. You know, it's if I felt good enough to go compete with the best guy, you know, in either prospective weight class, that would happen.
Would you?
So, but otherwise, right now, I'm enjoying kind of pursuing other things in life. You know, there's a lot left for me to do. I can do a lot of things in life, and unlike the rest of these guys, they're pretty stuck in their world. I'm not trying to beat it into the ground. I don't need to. I don't have to.
Well, I think that's what separates you from a lot of guys. Like we saw on your Instagram, you know, you just recently filmed a commercial for Ralph Lauren. Like you mentioned, you got the movies. You still got an avenue for competing. So there's a lot of other things going on in your life. If this was it, and if this was, you know, if you never fought again, like you mentioned, you were a former champion in multiple organizations. Would you be happy with the career that you've carved out with yourself if you never fought again?
I'd look back with no regrets. It's all part of the process. It's all part of the journey, and you move along and you learn and you move forward. So, I'm a happy person, content with where I'm at, and I'll let the future decide.
I know that guys like GSP have sort of put a time frame on their return. You're in your 30s, but you're still relatively young. Is there a time frame that you're giving yourself to make the decision that, okay, when I get to this certain age, that's it? Like, I'm not even going to consider it anymore. Is there sort of like a mark in your head, like a sort of time frame that you give yourself to make the decision of whether or not you'll fight again?
I'm 35, but I feel like I'm younger than most of these guys in their 20s. So I'm healthy, and I'm just living my life. I'm gonna do what I do for now, and if it comes back at some point, so be it. But I don't foresee that at this point. I'm pretty happy what I'm doing, and jumping into some other paths. There's lots left to conquer.
Because I know the one scenario that a lot of people are talking about, my friend Luke, is we know Chris Weidman didn't have a great move up to light heavyweight, but this is a fight that people have wanted, the rematch that people have wanted to see for quite some time. Would you see a potential scenario that if down the track things are going good, you would consider fighting that man to sort of finish up that, I guess, rivalry that you were looking to do? I mean, you guys were supposed to rematch each other before. Would that be something that you think would be enough to sort of make you interested, or is that not even enough for you to really think about it?
I don't really have it in me right now. I don't feel like it's a rivalry. It was 1-0. So I wish the best for Chris, and I have no interest in pursuing that at this point. So I just fighting it kind of consumes your life, and you can't focus on other things. And it's nice to take a break. I've been doing this thing for so many years, almost 14 years now. So I'm chilling, and I'm working on other businesses, working on other ventures, and I'm having fun doing it. It's nice to have that kind of off your shoulders. I get to enjoy my family, my friends, and not miss out on everything just because I got a fight coming up.
No, absolutely. And of course, Christmas, New Year's, all that good stuff coming up after Polaris 12. You mentioned Jacare and the fact that he sort of struggled to get Jan down. We saw Chris Weidman had a bit of a rough move up to light heavyweight as well. What do you make of a lot of these guys sort of trying to move up in weight class and things not really working out for them?
Weight issues, trying to make weight. For me, I feel like I'm killing myself to get down to 85. So I don't see. That was my reasoning. More weight classes, add them in. Where's that 195-pound weight division? Then maybe I think about coming back.
Oh, there you go. It's funny because people have been talking about that since like the Rich Franklin days, the 195-pound weight class. I think a lot of fighters like yourself would love to see that one come back. I'm just wondering, with Polaris, what do you think of your opponent in Nick Rodriguez? You mentioned it's not a fight, it's a grappling comp. But what do you think about Nick as an opponent? I think a lot of people are excited to see you get back to your grappling ways, man. I think people have this idea of you terrorizing people on the ground. I think it's going to be very exciting at Polaris.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting. I think this grappling world, it's somewhat suspect these days. And, I'm going to have some fun with this kid, Nick. I haven't seen too much of him, really. I didn't even know about him until the Abu Dhabi seemed to fare for himself pretty well, took second. And I've done a little homework. He seems to bully guys around with his wrestling. And is like decent high school wrestling, which doesn't mean too much when it comes to when he wrestles with the big boys. So, I mean, he's a good wrestler for Jiu Jitsu. I think you'll find that I'll be able to push him there. I'll be able to get takedowns if I need them. And then when it comes to the grappling, I'm a physical guy, and a lot of these jiu-jitsu guys aren't physical, and I can match him in so many ways there. So I'm excited, man. He's not one of those stupid leg lock guys that just kind of pull guard and butt scoot. This whole modern day jiu-jitsu thing kind of pisses me off. So it's pretty stupid, all the sport jiu-jitsu where the guys just all leg lock based, and they just compromise themselves trying to get these foot locks. And so it's nice to have a guy that's gonna actually go toe to toe at least.
Oh, for sure. You mentioned suspect before, the jiu-jitsu. What exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know.
No, well, I mean, Casper brings it up, but like, yeah,
Jiu-jitsu it's a weird thing these days. I don't know. Not a lot of rules.
Okay.
All these guys, these football. I don't know. I can fare well if I dedicate myself and do this thing like I really want to. Nick Rodriguez shouldn't be a problem, and neither should a lot of these guys.
Well, I mean, okay, so a couple of things that people talk about when it comes to the grappling right now is, obviously a lot of guys aren't being tested when they're competing, and you see guys like Gordon Ryan, okay? You see guys like Gordon Ryan. I'm not saying that the guy's a cheater or anything, but you see some of these physiques.
You see this kid, Nick Rodriguez versus Gordon Ryan? He's the biggest boy in the game.
That's right. So you're kind of coming in on the deep end. What do you think about sort of dipping your toe in an industry that's sort of littered with historically guys that have used PEDs?
It's grappling. I don't know. I'm going to enjoy beating him. That's what I'm going to do.
It's interesting sort of hearing you talk about it because like while you've sort of expressed how you're not that passionate about fighting, I hear a lot of passion in your voice when you're talking about grappling, and you sort of said how you expect to do farewell.
Is he trying to break out of Alcatraz right now?
Wow, someone calls Lucy a biatch.
My friend doesn't realize I'm on an interview.
Love it.
I got some visitors.
Love it. He's seeing Lucy in Alcatraz.
I think he's talking to Zoe over there.
Okay. Okay. But I was going to ask, do you feel like this is sort of I guess a rebirth in your competitive spirit, right? Like everything that maybe you once felt for MMA, you're feeling now about grappling because you haven't been the champion in grappling, and that's a new pinnacle for you to climb, right?
Actually, I have been the champion in grappling.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Sorry, no. I've never won any like black belt titles, any Abu Dhabi, nothing. But I did. I won the blue belt world title in the gi, and then the purple belt no gi. So it's like I'm no stranger to the top heap of the grappling arts, but I'm not trying to pursue that. That's not what I'm trying to do right here. Like, it's just a little bit of fun for me on the side, keep myself a bit competitive, and then alongside everything else I'm doing. So I don't by no means do I need to chase a world title in grappling, but we'll see how things go. I enjoy the art.
Well, you mentioned Nick Rodriguez. He's a runner-up at the ADCC 2019 in the plus 99 kilogram division. If you go through a guy like that, I mean, of course, a lot of people are expecting you to win, but a lot of the jiu-jitsu people are, the jiu-jitsu guys are probably thinking Nick is going to do it. But if you beat Nick, would you be aiming to sort of take on some of the biggest names in the sport, guys like Craig Jones, guys like Gordon Ryan, these kinds of guys that have sort of been making headlines all over the world?
I've rolled with Craig. I've rolled with Gordon. I go with Marcus Buchecha all the time. I'm very capable of doing what I need to do, But I'm just gonna have fun. I'm gonna take it one at a time. I'm gonna go out there and try to put this dude away, put him to sleep, and then I think beating the guy who took second in Abu Dhabi at heavyweight, I think that should say something. So I'm okay.
What you mentioned it before? What do you think about a lot of these grapplers who sort of are specialists at leg locks? Like we saw Lucky Giles, he went into the ADCC Absolute division and took a bronze medal at the ADCC 2019 by being able to leg lock a lot of these guys. What is your take on jiu-jitsu at the moment, and I suppose these specialists who are coming in and winning?
I'm a little disappointed, truthfully, to be honest. Jiu-jitsu, when I started back in the day, it was based off self-defense. And self-defense where, when I went down to Brazil and like you'd have two guys attacking you at once. And it's based off self-defense where it's like you're defending yourself in a, on the street. You're not going to fucking drop to your ass and butt scoot up to these guys and go for a leg lock. You're going to get stomped in the face. So, I mean, all these guys that completely compromising themselves and going up and underneath and just you're fucking sitting target, and you're doubling the force of every punch potentially that would happen. So I like jiu-jitsu, which is more real, where it's more real life kind of, where you're going out of the sport jiu-jitsu, this leg lock revolution thing. I don't know. I'm kind of annoyed by it. And, it's always about putting yourself in an advantageous situation, in a real life situation, for jiu-jitsu. That's where my belief was always jiu-jitsu. So, you see it change. It's a little annoying, but, those are my thoughts.
I like it though. I like when someone goes into something like, grappling with sort of like a different mindset with the aim to change things up and shake things up. I'm just wondering, we never did get to see yourself versus Jon Jones in MMA and the UFC, but do you think maybe this opens the door for you versus Jon Jones in a grappling comp? I feel like that's where you wanted to test yourself against Jon Jones anyway, right?
I have no interest, and I don't think he does either. So I think he's gonna do his thing, and I'm just gonna have a little fun on the side. I don't take this stuff too seriously. I'm not pursuing world titles. This is not my job. It's just fun, and that's what it is. And a little competition. That's all. It's a little fun.
Because we here at UFC 239 in the back, we've got a gossip girl in the house, and she told us there's a little bit of back and forth backstage between you and Jon Jones or something. Is that right? Was there a bit of trash talk at some point? UFC 239 in the back?
I wouldn't say trash talk. You keep it friendly. Me and Jon have always been cool, and friendly competition. That's all.
Do you see anybody sort of? It looks like Dominic Reyes is next. Obviously, he beat Chris Weidman. Do you see anybody as a threat to Jon Jones sort of in the near future now that you've sort of exited the division? Do you think there's anybody that sort of stands a chance?
He's not looking as good as he used to, but I still feel like he's tactical enough to get through most of these guys. And Corey Anderson, man, you got to give the guy some credit.
He's on fire.
Somebody's got to give the guy some credit. He's bringing it, and he's emotional, and he'll fucking. He seems like the most logical contender right now. I don't think everybody else. It's not marketable, but he's the most logical.
I feel like, and you mentioned it, Corey Anderson kind of has this massive chip on his shoulder. Everybody wrote him off against Johnny Walker, and then he went in and kind of shocked the world and not only beat him, but beat him on the feet. Do you think with this amount of momentum behind him, this amount of fire, he might even be the guy to go in and give Jon Jones a massive challenge, especially with his wrestling?
Yeah, but Dana doesn't like him. So, no. Yeah, so back to the political side of things, that doesn't work out for a lot of people.
Are you kind of happy that you don't have to deal with the politics anymore? At least that's one of the plus sides of being out of the fight game with the UFC.
I'm pretty happy.
We'll let you go.
I was just going to jump in, Cass. Corey Anderson, not only maybe not getting the next title shot, but also fined $10,000 for those dance moves at UFC 244. Yeah, so poor guy. Things just don't end up working out from him. As we wrap up, Luke, what can fans expect from this Polaris 12 match? By the way, people can check this out on UFC Fight Pass. I know a lot of people will be checking that out. It's November 30th in the US and 31st in Australia. What can people expect?
Well, I'm training and I'm working with the best people in the world, and they expect the best from me, and I expect the best from myself, and I expect to put this man to sleep. So it's gonna be fun.
Can't wait, man. Luke Rockhold, back to active competition. Make sure you guys watch Polaris 12. It's going to be on UFC Fight Pass November 30th in the US. It's going to be the 31st in Australia, obviously because of the time difference. And, of course, follow the man on Insta, at Twitter, at Luke Rockhold. Luke, you know it. You know we've been wanting to interview you for a very long time, so we really appreciate you jumping on, giving us the time, a lot of time, and even being kind enough to jump on Skype video, man. Always grateful. Thank you so much.
Cheers, boys.
There you go, guys. Luke Rockhold. What a guy. What a guy. Nice enough to come back to Submission Radio after a bit of an absence. And I feel like in a lot of ways, this was the man that, well, there's a lot of men that people want to hear from, but this was one of them. And he's been kind of laying low. And believe us when we say we've been trying to get him on the program for a long time to obviously dissect UFC 239 and find out where the man's sort of heading as far as his future. And he's kind enough to join us just seconds ago. So really appreciate it. Always grateful. Dennis, he did a phenomenal job of hounding the man and getting him on the program. And I like that he was quite open. I like that he was quite open with his answers and sort of spoke about where he's heading now. And it's interesting, right? It's interesting. I don't know if a return is ever going to be on the cards for Luke. I think he's the kind of guy that doesn't want to close a door and doesn't want to close opportunities. But I'll tell you what, man, if this was the last time that we saw Luke Rockhold in the octagon, he's got a lot of things to be proud of. I mean, being a UFC champion and being a Strikeforce champion, not a lot of men can say that they've done that. And I'm excited for Polaris. The guy's ready to make a splash and shake up the jiu-jitsu world.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I think the thing with Luke is he gets a bad rap. People say, oh, this guy doesn't come off that well in interviews and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, he is a really, really good guy. And sometimes he can't get his point across like he wants to from time to time. But, speaking to him on this interview, I think it's clear to see like he's in a good place. He's happy with what he's doing. And unlike a lot of other fighters, he's got a ton of options coming up. So it's good to see that he's not forcing himself back in the octagon because he has to.
Yeah.
He's going to take some time, ever think about it. And who knows, like this grappling scene right now, what's happening over at ADCC with these guys like Gordon Ryan, these guys like Craig Jones right now, it's big views. A lot of people are tuning into it. There's a lot of money going into it. So who knows if he does have a successful Polaris 12, there's a bit of money to be made and there's a bit of stuff to be done in the grappling world for a guy like Luke Rockhold. So very fascinated to see what happens there. But Cass,
I was just going to also say, like, in a week where Ben Askren has retired because his body is, he needs obviously a hip replacement and his body just isn't what it used to be. I think with Luke Rockhold, because he's so young looking and dashing looking and he was sort of, people expected this resurgence from him, it almost seems like, what do you mean? Why would you retire now? But I think given the amount of injuries that the man sustained, like that leg and his knees have been plaguing him for years, I kind of like that he might be retiring for MMA because there really is no reason to take more and more punishment. I think like you mentioned, there's a lot of guys that they have to keep fighting in order to pay their bills, and maybe they don't want to. Maybe it's not good for them physically. So I like to see a guy like Luke Rockhold walk away with, his head intact and, his body not completely falling apart on him and having those other avenues to be able to, make money.
Yeah, for sure, man. A great example, him and Ben Askren and a bunch of these other guys who are retiring. Great example for the young guys to show that they're there for a short time and a good time, but not a long time. So great to see him do this. And a big thank you to all of our other guests, Maycee Barber, Brett the Threat, Okamoto, and of course, Dan Hooker for coming on. We love talking to all those guys. It's a lot of fun. A quick reminder, we won't be back next week. Casper won't be around, but we'll be back the following week. So make sure to tune in to that episode of Submission Radio. Look out for our show. Then comments, reviews, anything you want through our social media. We're on Twitter, iTunes. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course we are on iTunes, and you can leave your review if need be, and Stitcher, TuneIn, and all the other great places you can check out your podcasts with that. It's great to be back, Cass. Final words, anything we want to say to the people as we finish this bad boy off and ride off into the sunset?
Yeah, it's getting hot here in Australia, so, wear some sunscreen. And also our thoughts are with the people who are currently in New South Wales and Queensland experiencing unprecedented amount of bushfires. And this is just something that a lot of people don't understand about Australia. It does get pretty dry here, and the fires here are crazy. Like, even we know people personally. I know, Dennis, you've had friends who have lost their houses in the past, years ago, to these crazy bushfires. So, yeah, I'm not about to sit here and say that thoughts are the answer, but our thoughts are with those people. And if there's anything that can be done as far as donations and stuff like that, and if you are considering donating to a worthy cause, I'd say it's pretty worthy because there's a bunch of, regular Joes, regular people like all of us and yourself listening who are potentially losing their houses at the moment. Bit of a grim note to go out on, but I don't know, something that came to mind as
No. It's a great point. So definitely look out for that. Help out in any way that you guys can. Of course, be careful. Don't get sucked into the fire areas unless it's safe for you guys and it's done by procedure. But yeah, our thoughts are definitely with those people. All the best to everybody. Hopefully there'll be some good updates before the next episode. And to you guys out there, it's great to be back. Thank you so much for joining us on Submission Radio. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode. Man, it's great to be back, Cass.